Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be doing the reading shifts tag. It's a tag that was created by Hannah from Hannah's Books, and she was kind enough to tag me in her original version. And it's a tag that's all about how your reading might change over time, how you might develop as a reader. So we'll jump right in. So the first prompt is, how has your reading developed over your lifetime? Do the kinds of books that bring you the most pleasure now differ from the books you loved most earlier in your life? If you've seen big changes in your reading since you've matured, what might explain your changing interests? Um, I often find that even when I think I'm discovering something new as a reader, um, it often it's often quite easy for me to connect it back to something earlier in my reading life that I enjoyed. So to give an example, a couple of years ago, I found I really quite enjoyed travel writing. I love the sort of travel memoirs by Patrick Lee Fermer, like A Time of Gifts, and sort of realizing that what I really loved about that book was kind of similar to um, part of what I love about Lord of the Rings, and it is about that sort of journey, and about just following someone about across a map and seeing what scrapes they get into, and yeah, I don't know that I could recognize something similar there in terms of just the kind of pleasure I got out of both books, even though they're very different books. Um, and I do feel like the thread that runs through really all of my reading life is my interest in history and my interest in mythology. And they were things that really excited me as a kid, even just sort of poring over picture books and storybooks and coffee table books. And it's still what excites me now, whether it's classical allusion in Elizabethan poetry or so whatever it may be, I still find it really exciting and fun. Um, so yeah, I'd say the biggest change really in my reading life is that kind of broadening of the stuff I'm reading, of learning more, becoming more curious about more things. Um, Maybe a big change was finishing university and no longer having a syllabus or any recommended reading or any books recommended by a supervisor or anything like that. And so having to just go on my own steam and work it out for myself. So that felt like a big change, and I can remember at the time um, just really sort of trusting my curiosity, and I made mental asterisks next to certain authors that I'd heard mentioned, um, particularly Robert Lowell and Borges and W.G. Sebald. And so, yeah, at that time, in the year or two after finishing university, I sort of really doubled down on actually getting round to these authors. I'd done English literature and focused more on stuff written in English, and so it was a whole fun experience, a whole broadening of my horizons just to read more translated literature as well. Um, and so, yeah, that seems to be more how it's changed for me so far, is just broadening and finding new things and being able to trust myself and trust my own curiosity more and more. Number two is, do you find yourself choosing different kinds of books at different periods of the year? So, for example, do the seasons affect what you read for pleasure? And then similarly, might you read very different kinds of books while on vacation? Um, so sometimes I get tempted to, sort of read more sort of Victorian novels in the for Victober or just generally at the end of the year. Whereas now I think I am really sort of trusting my curiosity a little bit more. So again, I often don't fit neatly into seasonal reading or the idea of seasonal reading. Um, sometimes I make videos about books that I might want to get to within a season, and some of them might, there might be a kind of seasonal feel to some of the books or some of the book covers. But generally speaking, I think generally speaking, it's just following curiosity, and it's not uh, too much of deciding to read a certain book at a certain time to sort of fit, I don't know, a certain kind of mood or something. I don't know. I don't want to feel like I'm living inside a sort of Pinterest board or something. But and then with the second one, might I read very different kinds of books while on vacation? Generally not. I tend to just carry on with whatever I'm reading and pack a couple of extra books should I finish the books I'm currently reading. Sometimes I do try to tie in what I'm reading to where I'm going. Most ostentatiously, I suppose, was when I visited Paris. I was right in the middle of reading Proust, and so yeah, it sort of made sense, even though I think I was in volume 3 or 4, so it wouldn't have been this exact one that I would have brought with me. But I made room in my bag because I wanted to read Proust in Paris, and then it was lovely, when I think of Proust and certain scenes, I can see myself reading them, in the little flat in Paris where we were staying. So yeah, that was quite lovely. And then at the same time, I was reading Rimbaud, and so again brought Rimbaud with me, and then it was lovely seeing, a picture with Rimbaud in it while we are there as well. So yeah, a little ostentatious. Even more ostentatious then was, or obnoxious, um, was reading A Movable Feast while I was there as well. And this was the book that I was, putting in my bag and just had with me as we were going around and reading it on the metro and stuff like that. So that was the most ostentatious out of all of them. Um, Sometimes the way I connect a book to a place that I'm going to is kind of less obvious than that, and I don't always do it, but it can be fun to do it sometimes. Number 3 is, do specific experiences in your life ever shape what you chose to read? For example, did you read obsessively about child rearing when your kids were little, or about gardening as spring is about to begin, or about the experience of grief when someone you loved died? Um, yeah, this isn't something I found myself doing that much. Um, there is a book about parenting that I'd like to get to at some point, just from hearing from my wife Jasmine, who has read it, that she reckons this one book is kind of what we're doing anyway. And so I'm kind of curious just to see what we're doing. um, yeah, that might be quite nice. But yeah, otherwise this isn't really something I do. I don't go to reading in as um, I don't know. I can't think of a way of saying it that doesn't make moving to a book about grief. When you're grieving, I don't want to sort of make it sound pejorative to do that, to kind of have this kind of self-help thing, because it can be helpful. Um, but so far it's not been a strong element of my reading, but that may change. Number 4 is, have there been any times in your life when circumstances have limited or changed your reading in some way? Perhaps caretaking responsibilities or a big move that made it hard for you to made it hard for you to find as much time to read as you'd like, or personal illness that made it harder to concentrate, or maybe just a long term some long-term travel that might have limited your book choices. How do you deal with those circumstances? Um, I think just generally, my general response to that would be don't try to impose the reading you'd like to do onto your circumstances. If your circumstances say no, then listen to your circumstances. Um, and so, you know, now being myself a parent, um, reading less is just something I have to get used to, and it's, my circumstances are saying read less, and so I read less. Um, I can remember moving house, doing a lot of decorating and things, and I'd gone from, maybe the month before reading a nice handful of books, and then the month we were decorating and moving in, I just read one book, and that was okay because it was a really, really good book. But again, in one sense, it's a shame, that we have lives, and things happen, and we have to make allowances. But um, in the long run, it's the best thing to do. Um, so yeah, moving house has been one for me that often affects my reading. I hate feeling in the middle of things, and I find it hard to concentrate on things I like doing, like reading or writing, or I just find it hard to just relax and concentrate on anything else when there's stuff that needs doing. And so um, moving house particularly is I really don't like. Um, yeah, having a kid, that was a circumstance that changed things significantly. Um, and I did find that really the big thing, I think if you're going to have a thing that's going to change the rhythm of your life significantly, um, if it's something that you can see coming and something that's not unexpected, so like moving house or having a kid or a new job, taking on more responsibilities with work, or something like that, where you can you've got time to prepare for it. Um, I think for me, it was a big thing to sort of cultivate a sense of routine in the lead up to that change. And then even if your routine changes, as it almost certainly will with that change, um, you've at least sort of consolidated the things that you love and the things that mattered, and hopefully sort of weeded out some of the other things that matter less, so that when I was, um, you know, in the first few weeks after my daughter was born, I wasn't going straight to my phone if I had a straight, a stray few seconds, but would find myself reading more when I could, with her asleep on my lap or whatever. And so, um, yeah, having routine, and building routine, and then being able to adapt it to your circumstances, and then just listening to your circumstances, I think are the big things for dealing with change as a reader. Number 5 then is booktube is full of discussions about reading slumps when dedicated readers seem to lose interest for a while in books. Sometimes they just can't find a book that appeals to them. Have you ever experienced a reading slump? If so, how did you handle it? If not, do you have any advice to give people who are expecting slumps or experiencing slumps? Um, I've never felt a full-on reading slump. There have been a few times where I felt I was moving in the direction of a reading slump, and so again, listening to my circumstances, I changed what I was reading. Um, and so I can remember specifically one summer where I think I just read um, Crime and Punishment and The Castle by Kafka, just a little too close to each other. And so I was just feeling icky, and um, um, yeah, I think icky is really the best word to describe it with both of those books. and I just needed to read something a little bit silly, I suppose, after those books. And part of me wanted to just dive straight back into something serious and dark. But I had to just read something silly instead, and I sort of recognised that had I not done that, I may have just stopped reading for a while. And there've been similar times. There've been times, I think this year I've been kind of less interested in reading novels, and I've just sort of just gone with that and not forced myself to read novels that I really don't want to read, which then makes the good novels stand out a bit more. Um, so yeah, it's sort of similar to the last one. It's just sort of listen to your circumstances. If you're picking up a book that's not appealing to you, then try something that's the polar opposite. Just listen to what you want, and if it is that you're just really feeling like you just don't want to be reading, then don't read. But so far, that's not really happened. Um, Number 6 is booktubers also talk about book hangovers, when readers are so moved by a book that they find it difficult to move on to a new book. Have you ever felt this way? I haven't really felt this way. Um, I suppose in a way it's similar to how I feel about reading slumps, and I can kind of feel when a certain book might give me a book hangover, and often I just find that the way to get over that is to sort of plan in advance, what other books I might be curious about, what other books might be a good contrast to that book, so that, when reading I can remember when finishing Proust, um, I had to think of something, well, short to read, some non-fiction, and just making sure it was quite different, and sort of planning it ahead in advance. I found helped quite a bit, but I've never really, yeah, got myself in a full-on book hangover in that way, because usually my curiosity is enough to pull me through into the next book. And then number 7 is, tell us about a few books that almost always work for you. Something that might have remained a favourite throughout your life, despite any changing reading tastes. Something that always seems to just hit the right spot when you need a lift, or perhaps some lifetime book hangover where the text will always be in the back of your head. Um, and so I think I mentioned Tolkien earlier. I've tried filming this a couple of times, so I can't remember if it was in this version of the video that I mentioned Tolkien. But certainly the Lord of the Rings, whenever I read it, whenever I've gone back to it, whenever I think of it, it's always worth it, and will be one that I'll be going back to again and again, for the rest of my reading life. And then the Brontes, particularly Emily Bronte and Wuthering Heights, works every time, and it's just kind of the world of the book and Emily's writing that really, I find arresting, and this kind of sense of being so surprised that this book that really shouldn't work works. Yeah, so this is one that I can't remember how many times I've read Wuthering Heights, but yeah, I love it. Probably my favourite novel of all time is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And I think this is one that just lives in the back of my head. And it's rare that at least a week, maybe even a day, goes by where I don't just briefly think of The Magic Mountain. And I'm not entirely sure why. Well, no, I love the book, so that's why. And it's just a whole world of a book. And this sense that there are so many layers and so many things about this book that I don't understand. And it's exciting to think of going back to it every time. So I read it a couple of years ago for the first time, and then I think in less than a year I got back to it and read it again. And I'm trying to read a few other things by Thomas Mann before I go back to it, but it's always very tempting just to go back. And so this is one of those. It's a book that's a heavy hitter that demands a lot of your attention. But for me, I would still kind of class it as a comfort read in a way. Um, so yeah, that's a big one. Kafka is an author that always works for me as well. I love his sense of humour and his sort of quite bleak outlook. Um, yeah, as I said um, earlier, I think when reading sort of darker stuff, I try to balance it out a little bit, or at least just try to monitor how I'm feeling, just in case. But yeah, Kafka is a big one, and he's one of those ones where if I'm compiling a mental list of favourite authors, he's not always on there, um, and yet I often find myself thinking of him and coming back to him, and particularly his short stories. Another one that again I just find myself thinking of all the time, like Thomas Mann, is just an author that I enjoy being in the company of, I suppose, and it's a very different writer to Thomas Mann, and that's Dante, and particularly the Divine Comedy. Um, and again, sort of like the Magic Mountain, there's just this sense that there's so much going on um, in the Divine Comedy, um, that I can just spend the rest of my life trying to work out what's going on in here. And then it helps that I enjoy spending time with Dante. I love the way he writes. I love his long, epic similes, and um, you know, despite the difficulty, um, I still sort of feel comfortable with him. And just the other day, I was wondering whether I needed yet another translation of the Divine Comedy. I think I do, for my next read through, whenever that may be. Um, and then really a few poets, because I think poetry feels a little more applicable to this prompt than some of the some of the novels that I've been talking about. I think generally I feel most at home as a reader when I'm just sort of dipping through a poetry anthology, whether it's a big one like the Norton Anthology or something else, and whether I'm looking for a specific poet or a specific poem, or whether I'm just aimlessly going through and seeing what I find. That's something that I always love doing, and yeah, it's a similar sense of connecting to an earlier reader, like when I'm reading about mythology or history. I have this sense of continuity when I'm reading in that kind of way. But a few poets I often find myself coming back to. Um, I often mention Alice Oswald as being um, probably my favourite living poet. So this is Darts, one of her books that I've read a few times. Um, Rilke, who's I think already been mentioned in this video. Um, Again, I find myself going back to and thinking of Rilke a fair bit. And again, he's probably overall my favourite poet. He'd certainly make it quite comfortably into the top 5. As would the next one, W.S. Graham, a great Scottish poet who, I mean, his poetry isn't always silly, and yet there's this sense of playfulness in his poetry that I really love. Um, and I'm not exactly sure what it is his poems connect to, but I do find myself connecting to something that makes me feel grounded, and I'm not entirely sure what that is yet. So again, like with Dante, like with Thomas Mann, I've a kind of a feeling that I've got a lot more to discover with this writer, with W.S. Graham, and we'll see. We'll see. Maybe um, maybe my relationship with him will change, but for certainly the last 5 years or so, he's been a kind of mainstay, and a poet I enjoy spending time with. And then finally, again, kind of like Kafka, this is a writer that I don't consciously put on my mental lists of favourite writers. I'm very indecisive, and so I've never made really any videos about my favourite books of all time or my favourite authors of all time. But this is one where um, I think from the outside, I think a lot of people would think probably is one of my favourite writers. And it's certainly a perennial writer for me. Um, but I don't know, I often um, find myself hesitating slightly to call them a favourite. And that's T.S. Eliot. Um, and I think particularly The Wasteland. I mean, I much prefer Four Quartets. But I think there's a part of my brain that since the first time I read The Wasteland is still sort of whirring a little bit, and um, when every other part of my brain is unconscious, that little part of my brain is just running in the background, just trying to work out what's going on in that poem. And I mean, it's a poem I come back to at least once a year, I think. And I love the way it sounds, and I love, again, like with Dante, just being able to plumb other depths, not even deeper depth, but just other seas, other lakes that I didn't know were there at the first time I read it. And yeah, it's always going to be at the back of my mind, like with Proust. There are going to be moments in my everyday life that make me think of The Wasteland. Um, random things I hear are just going to make me think of certain lines. And so it's a book that, although I've not consciously sort of decided that it's one of my favourite books, and a book that I necessarily want to come back to, is a book that I find myself coming back to, and I find that it's kind of permeated my brain as well. And so I'll end with that one, with T.S. Eliot. Um, the eighth tag is to tag people, and I've been terribly unprepared, and so I will leave it open. But yeah, please feel free to give this tag a go. If you'd like to, I can see quite a few people have already tried it. But yeah, I think for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.